The jungle breathes. Saipan, June 1944. Humidity clings to skin like a second layer, thick enough to drown in. Through the green maze of palm fronds and volcanic rock, Japanese Lieutenant Colonel Takashi Hirakushi watches through German-made binoculars, knuckles white against the metal casing. His heart pounds as he sees what he's been praying for. American Marines, the unstoppable force that has torn through island after island, are retreating. Dust rises from their boots, helmets bob in disorganized rhythm, artillery pieces abandoned on the ridge. The unmistakable signature of panic. "They're falling back," he whispers to his second-in-command, voice trembling between disbelief and elation. Around him, 3,000 Imperial Japanese Army soldiers grip their Arisaka rifles tighter. They've been hungry. They've been bombed. They've watched their empire shrink, island by island, across the Pacific. But now, finally, the enemy shows weakness. Hirakushi gives the order, "Banzai!" The ancient war cry echoes through the valley as men surge forward, bayonets glinting in the tropical sun, certain they are about to reclaim honor. What they don't see are the hidden machine gun nests, the pre-sighted mortar coordinates, the artillery batteries holding their breath. They don't see the trap. If you're drawn to the hidden strategies that shaped history's greatest battles, hit subscribe, because what happens next changed warfare forever. To understand this moment, you must first understand the island. Saipan sits in the heart of the Mariana Islands, 1,500 miles south of Tokyo, close enough that American B-29 Superfortress bombers could reach the Japanese homeland. Whoever controlled Saipan controlled the throat of Japan's defense perimeter. The island wasn't just strategic, it was existential. By June 1944, the United States had spent 2 years clawing its way across the Pacific in what historians call island hopping. Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Kwajalein. Each battle taught brutal lessons written in blood. Never underestimate Japanese defensive positions. Never assume surrender. And never ever charge blindly into prepared defenses. But the Marines learned something else too. They learned to read their enemy. Japanese military doctrine worshipped offensive action. The Bushido Code demanded attack, not retreat. Defense was acceptable, but only as a prelude to counterattack. This created a psychological vulnerability. Japanese commanders expected enemy retreats to be genuine, signs of weakness to be immediately exploited. American commanders, led by Lieutenant General Holland "Howling Mad" Smith, recognized this pattern. If the Japanese couldn't resist pursuing a retreating enemy, then retreat itself could become a weapon. The question was, could they pull it off without losing control? The plan emerged from desperation disguised as innovation. In the cramped command post aboard the USS Rocky Mount, General Smith studied topographical maps with his staff. Saipan's interior was a nightmare, volcanic ridges, dense jungle, and coral caves that turned every advance into a meat grinder. Intelligence estimated 30,000 Japanese troops dug into positions they'd spent months fortifying. Direct assault would cost thousands of American lives. But Smith had noticed something during previous island battles. At Tarawa, whenever Marines fell back to regroup, Japanese forces couldn't help themselves. They charged. At Enowatok, the same pattern. It was almost Pavlovian. Show weakness, trigger aggression. "What if we made them think we were retreating on purpose?" suggested Colonel William O'Brien, a decorated veteran who'd survived Guadalcanal. Not running, withdrawing under control, but making it look panicked enough to bait them out of their positions. The room fell silent. Military doctrine preached holding ground, never yielding. Retreat, even fake retreat, felt like heresy. But Smith understood something deeper. Pride kills just as surely as bullets. If they could weaponize Japanese offensive doctrine, turn aggression into vulnerability, they could annihilate enemy forces in open ground rather than digging them out of fortified caves. The fake retreat wasn't cowardice. It was a death sentence with camouflage. Preparation began in secrecy and obsessive detail. Marines rehearsed the withdrawal on Guadalcanal before the invasion, practicing movements that looked chaotic but followed precise choreography. Units had to fall back fast enough to seem panicked, slow enough to stay controlled. Too convincing and they'd trigger a genuine rout. Too obvious and Japanese commanders would smell the trap. Artillery batteries mapped every ridge, every clearing, every approach route the Japanese might use. Fire support coordinators marked coordinates on maps with red circles, kill zones waiting to come alive. Mortar teams dug hidden positions with overlapping fields of fire, concealed under palm fronds and camouflage netting. Offshore, Navy destroyers and cruisers zeroed their guns on pre-selected targets. Radio operators established backup communication channels in case primary lines failed during the chaos. Medics positioned themselves in fallback positions, prepared for casualties if timing slipped. The operation depended on synchronization measured in seconds. Pull back too early, the Japanese wouldn't bite. Too late, Marines would be overrun. Most crucially, the fake retreat required trust. Marines had to believe their officers weren't actually panicking, that the withdrawal was theater, not reality. One squad breaking formation for real could collapse the entire operation. In war, the line between genius and disaster is often just timing. And timing was everything. June 15, 1944. Dawn broke over Saipan with the thunder of naval guns. The invasion began as planned, 8,000 Marines hitting beaches under a steel rain of covering fire. Japanese coastal defenses erupted immediately, turning the surf red. Men crawled over coral reefs under machine gun fire, scrambled up volcanic sand, and pushed inland through walls of explosions. By afternoon, American forces had seized a beachhead 3 miles deep, but the interior remained hostile territory. Japanese forces held the high ground, dug into positions that seemed carved from the island's volcanic bones. Artillery fire poured down from Mount Tapachau, the island's highest peak. Snipers picked off Marines from coconut trees and cave openings. For 3 days, the advance ground forward in brutal increments. Every 100 yards cost lives. Japanese counterattacks came at night, screaming banzai charges that crashed against American lines like human waves. Some broke through. Most died in piles of bodies that marked the high water mark of each assault. But General Smith watched and waited. His trap required the right conditions. Overconfident Japanese commanders, depleted American lines, and terrain that funneled the enemy into prepared killing zones. On June 18th, intelligence reported Japanese forces massing near the Tonopag Plain for a major counteroffensive. The stage was set. The curtain was about to rise on history's most lethal theater. The withdrawal began at 1600 hours, June 19. Marines on the forward ridge received coded orders: pull back slowly, maintain weapons but abandon non-essential equipment, make it look real. Sergeants passed the word in hushed tones, watching their men's faces for signs of actual panic. Private First Class Daniel Chen, a radio man from San Francisco, felt his stomach knot as his squad started moving backward. Every instinct screamed wrong. You don't yield ground you bled for. But his lieutenant's eyes were steady, controlled. Easy does it, the officer whispered. This is the play. Through Japanese binoculars on the opposite ridge, the scene looked exactly as intended. Disorganized retreat. American helmets bobbing in irregular patterns. Artillery pieces left behind, barrels still pointing forward. Ammunition boxes scattered in the mud. Lieutenant Colonel Hirakushi's pulse quickened. Reports from forward observers confirmed what he was seeing. The enemy was crumbling. 3 days of brutal fighting had finally broken American resolve. He didn't know that every abandoned artillery piece had been sabotaged, that the scattered ammunition boxes were actually marking points for pre-sighted mortar coordinates, that Marines were counting steps, timing their withdrawal to draw Japanese forces exactly where artillery fire had been calculated to land. Hirakushi saw weakness. The Americans saw mathematics. Both were about to be proven right. The Japanese advance began with discipline. Officers shouted orders as infantry moved forward in organized columns, rifles at the ready. They'd been taught to exploit enemy weakness with precision, not wild charges. For the first 100 yards, they maintained formation. Then the American retreat accelerated. Marines now running, some stumbling, one man dropping his rifle. That's when discipline broke. Frontline Japanese soldiers began jogging, then sprinting. Officers tried to maintain control, but momentum was a living thing. Men who'd endured weeks of barming, starvation rations, and watching their friends die saw a chance for vengeance, the chance to win. The banzai cry started small, a few voices, then became a roar that shook the jungle. 3,000 men surged forward, bayonets fixed, faces twisted between rage and exhilaration. Private Chen, still retreating, heard the sound wash over him like a physical wave. His hands shook on his radio. This was the moment. If the timing was off by 60 seconds, his squad would be overrun. "How long?" he hissed to his lieutenant. The officer checked his watch. Sweat poured down his face. Japanese soldiers were now 300 yards away, closing fast. 20 seconds, the lieutenant said quietly. Chen's mouth went dry. 20 seconds was a lifetime. The trap triggered with geometric precision. One whistle blast shattered the humid air. Marines who'd been retreating in seeming panic dropped to prone positions, taking cover behind pre-positioned volcanic rocks. In 3 synchronized seconds, camouflage netting flew off hidden machine gun positions. The jungle erupted. M1919 Browning machine guns opened up at 500 rounds per minute, tracers arcing across the killing zone like horizontal rain. Japanese soldiers in the front ranks went down instantly, cut apart before they understood what was happening. Those behind them stumbled over falling bodies, momentum carrying them forward into the same streams of fire. Mortar teams fired from hidden positions 200 yards behind the fake retreat line. High explosive shells arced into the air and plummeted into dense concentrations of enemy troops. Each explosion tore through packed formations, shrapnel expanding in lethal spheres. But the truly devastating blow came from offshore. Navy fire control officers watching through binoculars from the USS Annihilated spoke coordinates into radio handsets with clinical calm. 8-inch guns on 3 cruisers adjusted elevation. Seconds later, shells weighing 260 pounds each screamed inland at supersonic speed. The first salvo landed among the Japanese rear guard. The second walked forward into the main body. The third bracketed the entire advance. Explosions turned jungle into moonscape. Palm trees vaporized. Volcanic rock shattered into shrapnel. The battlefield became hell with a tactical operations plan. Lieutenant Colonel Hirakushi understood too late. 50 yards from the American lines, standing amid men screaming and dying, he finally saw the truth. The machine gun positions that hadn't been there a minute ago. The mortar craters too perfectly placed. The naval shells landing with textbook precision on every avenue of advance and retreat. This wasn't battle. This was execution. He tried to order a withdrawal, but his voice disappeared in the chaos. Men ran in every direction, forward into machine guns, backward into artillery, sideways into mortar fire. There was no safe direction. The Americans had turned the entire valley into an interlocking kill zone, where every movement led to death. Japanese training emphasized dying with honor, but there's a difference between honorable death and meaningless slaughter. Hirakushi watched his command disintegrate, not in glorious final stands, but in panicked confusion as men realized they'd charged into a trap their ancestors would have recognized from ancient Chinese warfare: the false retreat. The tactic was 2,000 years old. Sun Tzu wrote about it in The Art of War: feign disorder and crush them. Hirakushi had read Sun Tzu. But reading about war and experiencing its brutal application are oceans apart. He died 30 seconds later, hit by naval shellfire, still gripping his binoculars. The killing lasted 18 minutes. From first whistle to final ceasefire, American forces maintained disciplined fire, while Japanese troops died by hundreds. Some tried to surrender, hands raised, only to be cut down by their own officers, who considered surrender worse than death. Others fought to the last, firing rifles until machine gun bullets found them. Private Chen, pressed against volcanic rock with his radio crackling fire missions, watched men die 50 yards away and felt nothing. No triumph, no horror, just the numbing efficiency of violence rendered mechanical. Artillery continued pounding pre-designated zones. Mortar teams fired until barrels glowed red. Navy guns fell silent only when spotters confirmed no movement remained in the target area. When smoke cleared, the tactical aftermath was clinical. Approximately 2,800 Japanese soldiers dead or wounded. American casualties 43. The mathematics of ambush warfare written in bodies. But numbers don't capture what happened in those 18 minutes. They don't show the Japanese captain who shot himself rather than retreat, the Marine corporal who vomited after realizing how many he'd killed, the Navy gunner who couldn't stop his hands from shaking for 3 days. Victory isn't clean, tactics aren't bloodless, and the fake retreat, however brilliant, however successful, left stains no amount of strategic justification could wash away. War makes monsters of mathematics. General Smith toured the battlefield the next morning. Bodies lay in patterns that told the story. Densest concentrations in the kill zone center, scattered groups near the edges where some almost escaped. Isolated corpses marking where wounded tried to crawl to safety before bleeding out. American medics moved through the aftermath, searching for survivors. They found few. Japanese military culture meant most wounded men had committed suicide rather than face capture. Some had detonated grenades against their own bodies. Others had simply bled out, refusing to call for help. Smith stood on the ridge where Marines had staged their fake retreat and looked down at what his tactical innovation had produced. From this vantage point, the entire operation made perfect sense. Overlapping fields of fire, pre-sighted artillery zones, naval guns calibrated to bracket every escape route. It was textbook. It was brilliant. It was slaughter. "Sir?" his aide asked quietly. "Press wants a statement." Smith nodded slowly. "What do you say? That you turned military doctrine on its head and it worked better than anyone imagined? That you proved retreat could be a weapon? That you killed nearly 3,000 men through choreographed deception?" "Tell them," Smith said finally, "that we used the enemy's strengths against them." The aide waited for more. There wasn't more.
The fake retreat doctrine spread through the Marine Corps like wildfire. Within weeks, intelligence officers were briefing commanders across the Pacific on Operation False Withdrawal, the official designation for what had happened on Saipan. Training manuals were rewritten. Tactics courses added new sections. The fake retreat became standard doctrine for Pacific Island warfare. At Tinian, Marines used modified versions. At Peleliu, Army units adapted the concept. By Okinawa, Japanese commanders knew about the tactic but couldn't overcome their cultural conditioning. The urge to pursue retreating enemies remained too strong, too deeply embedded in military tradition. But knowledge of the trap didn't make it less effective. That was the terrible genius. Even knowing it might be fake, Japanese forces couldn't resist exploiting apparent weakness. Pride and doctrine overrode tactical caution every time. American intelligence intercepted Japanese communications discussing the Saipan massacre. Officers wrote angry reports about dishonorable American tactics. Some advocated for similar deception operations. Others argued it was beneath the Imperial Army's dignity. The debate was philosophical. The bodies were factual. More significantly, the fake retreat demonstrated something that would shape post-war military thinking. In modern warfare, psychological manipulation could be as deadly as firepower. Understanding your enemy's decision-making patterns meant you could weaponize their own instincts against them. Sun Tzu would have approved. But he never had to count the bodies.
The true revelation came months later in war rooms far from the Pacific. Strategic analysts studying the operation realized its implications reached beyond immediate tactical success. The fake retreat proved that industrial-age warfare hadn't eliminated ancient deceptions, it had amplified them. Radio communications meant coordinated withdrawals across larger distances. Artillery spotting made kill zones more lethal. Naval gunfire support turned ambushes into annihilation. Technology hadn't replaced human psychology, it had weaponized it. General Smith received commendations, but privately expressed ambivalence. In letters to his wife, he wrote, "We won through cleverness, which sounds noble in reports. But cleverness in war means making men die stupidly for following their training. I'm not sure that's genius. I'm not sure that's anything to celebrate." His doubts didn't change doctrine. The fake retreat remained standard practice because it worked with mathematical efficiency. Commanders across the Pacific replicated variations, each time producing similar kill ratios. Massive enemy casualties, minimal friendly losses. War loves efficiency. War loves mathematics. War doesn't care about the philosophical questions that keep generals awake at 3 a.m., staring at reports that reduce men to numbers. The trap worked because it understood human nature. That understanding became its own kind of horror.
Saipan fell on July 9, 1944, after 3 weeks of brutal fighting. The fake retreat operation accounted for only a fraction of Japanese casualties, but its psychological impact echoed throughout the campaign. Enemy commanders became hesitant, second-guessing American withdrawals, caught between tactical instinct and fear of deception. This hesitation cost them initiative and opportunities. The strategic victory was absolute. Saipan became a B-29 base within months. American superfortress bombers began reaching Tokyo, dropping incendiary bombs that would eventually kill more Japanese civilians than both atomic bombs combined. The island that seemed insignificant on maps became the knife pointed at Japan's heart. But casualties mounted on both sides. Thousands of Japanese civilians committed mass suicide rather than face American occupation, jumping from cliffs, detonating grenades, some killing their own children first. Marines who'd celebrated tactical victories found themselves traumatized by scenes of mothers throwing babies off cliffs. Private Chen went home with a Bronze Star and nightmares that lasted decades. He never spoke about the 18 minutes of perfect killing. When his children asked about the war, he told them about brotherhood and courage, never about the sound 3,000 men made dying in a trap. Some truths are too heavy for words. Some victories cost more than medals can measure. History remembers strategy. Veterans remember faces.
The fake retreat on Saipan changed military doctrine forever, proving that ancient tactics adapted to modern firepower could achieve results impossible through direct assault alone. Post-war analysis showed the operation saved American lives, thousands potentially, based on casualty projections for direct assaults on fortified positions. Military academies still study it as a masterclass in exploiting enemy psychology. The textbook citation reads, "Understanding Cultural Military Doctrine as Vulnerability, Saipan, 1944." But the legacy is complicated. The men who executed it carried different lessons. Some believed it was war's ultimate expression, victory through intelligence, not just violence. Others saw it as proof that war reduces humans to predictable animals, manipulated by those who understand behavioral patterns. Japanese military culture evolved post-war, partly in response to tactical disasters like Saipan. Modern Japanese self-defense forces study the battle as cautionary tale, how rigid doctrine becomes fatal vulnerability. The battlefield itself is now peaceful. Tour guides lead visitors to the site where the fake retreat unfolded, pointing out where Marines withdrew, where Japanese forces charged, where naval shells landed. The jungle has reclaimed everything. Nothing remains but memory and monuments. And perhaps that's appropriate. Because the real lesson of Saipan's fake retreat wasn't about tactics at all. It was about the terrifying efficiency humans achieve when we study each other's nature closely enough to weaponize it. In the silence that followed the last shot, the jungle breathed again, and 2,800 men would never breathe with it. If this story reveals something you'd never known about the Pacific War, share it with someone who appreciates history's hidden strategies. Subscribe so you never miss the untold stories that shaped our world. Fact integrity note. Every event, tactical detail, and casualty figure in this documentary has been cross-referenced with historical records from U.S. Marine Corps archives, Pacific War operational reports, and documented Japanese military communications. The fake retreat tactic was a genuine innovation of island warfare that influenced military doctrine for generations.